The exception, of course, is nuclear power. If there were safe, economically affordable nuclear power, that would be a step function difference. But in the rest of the energy world, it's not that case. So mathematically, it's very difficult to put our faith in something that will be completely different 15 years ago from now than it is. One final math point, which is dramatic for people who've spent time outside the United States, and I think should become more dramatic here, which is simply how many people in the world are going to want some little fraction of the life that we lead, who are going to want to move from the hotel life in Louisville last night with no water to the hotel life in Louisville this morning with water. I'll give you two illustrations here. The first is one that I found this a really vivid thought experiment for me once I heard it. If you don't remember anything else I say, which is likely, perhaps you'll remember this. We know that China has more people than America does, but here's how many more people. The arable land in China is about the same as the U.S. east of the Mississippi. Essentially, the rest of China is desert or plateau or Tibet or whatever. So the arable land is like the U.S. east of the Mississippi. And in that territory, they have the equivalent of all the people in America and all the people in Brazil and all the people in Mexico and all the people in the rest of South America and all the people in the rest of North America and all the people in Nigeria and all the people in Japan, all in this eastern one-third of the United States. And you can understand why Chinese officials will say, you foreigners say, you view everything in China as being divided by, or multiplied by 1.3 billion. We view it all as being divided by 1.3 billion because it's such a struggle. And so many of these people still don't have electricity in their houses, don't work in ways where their wages are magnified by all the powers of mechanization and all the rest. And they are going to do those things and to want them. I had a good friend in China named Kevin Wong, who was working for an environmental company there that made very, very good insulating building glass to try to save energy waste in China. And he pointed out to me when I was meeting him in a bar in a city in Shandong, he said, we're sitting here in this bar. My father, who grew up on a farm, once a month as a treat, he would have a cold beer from the refrigerator down in the store in his little village. I'm having a beer every night. It takes power to live in air conditioning, to have elevators, etc. That multiplied by billions in China, in India, in Africa is going to drive demand. So in short, to wrap up this first point, coal is going to be with us because it is the bedrock supply of energy. There isn't an easy alternative. Even if we do the most we can fastest with everything else, we will still need coal. And so this is a reality. This is short-term benefit for people in some industries. It has long-term challenging consequences, but this is point one, I would argue to you. Point two is that it's worth recognizing that a different era in coal is going to begin. You can argue it should not, but I'd say it is, just based on reporting on this around the world. And the way I'm going to suggest this is that it's not simply the sort of familiar challenges of the coal industry, which, again, you all have been leading and contending with, miner safety, community health, and all the rest. Rather, I think it's worth understanding the likely international complexion of the arguments about carbon and coal's role in carbon. And I'm going to try to present this in the most clinically detached way I can, just to explain the landscape of international discussion. And I'll try to note clearly the areas where there is disagreement and the areas where there is not. But just to see this, just like looking at a weather report, you may not like the view of the next weather system that's moving in, but it's worth knowing what that system is. And it's in that connection that I present what I have here. I think there's both a market case and a scientific case for recognizing that the pressure is going to be on coal in a very significant way to be used in a cleaner, less polluting fashion over time. The market case is one you're well familiar with. that it will be easier for your industries, your utilities, the mining companies, the energy companies, to clean up if there are market signals, whether it's through prices on carbon or whatever, than if there are regulatory obligations. Businesses can just work better if there are taxes or whatever. Nobody likes taxes, but they're better than regulations in terms of giving businesses alternatives to proceed in the most efficient way. The reason there are likely to be internationally and nationally these kinds of market signals, maybe not next year, maybe not 4 years from now, but over the next 10 or 15 years, certainly, in my view, is I think the scientific perspective, which I will put this way. I found it very useful when talking with scientists at the Lawrence Livermore National Labs and other places to get the big picture of what we're talking about when we talk about carbon balance in the world. Forgive me if you already know this, but for some who don't, I think it's worth bearing in mind. The way to sort of start on the global scale is to recognize that human activity of all sorts, whether it's cars or power plants or whatever else, puts about 37 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. In principle, that's a number that doesn't mean anything, but to give it some scale, about 20 years ago it was about 25 billion tons, so it's been about a 50% increase in that time. It could be about 50 billion tons 20 years from now. And if you divided that among all the people in the world, it would be about 6 tons per year per person. But in reality, the way it works out is that we in the U.S., it's about 25 tons per person. In Europe, it's about 11 tons per person. In China, it's about 8 tons per person, surprisingly high. That's because their industry is relatively wasteful, even though their personal life is relatively austere. In India, it's about 3 tons per person versus 25 for us. In Africa, it's under 1 ton per person. The significance of this number, as you know, but again, let me try to sketch out, is that when the carbon goes into the atmosphere much more quickly than it can naturally come out, either being absorbed by trees or being sunk into the ocean, and therefore, over time, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere goes up. I think this is not a controverted point, and the main benchmarks here are before the Industrial Revolution, let's say at the time of James Watt, the prevailing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was about 280 parts per million. By the time of Henry Ford, it was about 300 parts per million. Since then, it's been going up about 2 parts per million per year. It's now closing in on about 400 parts per million. And if any of you have school children, by the time they go to college or have families, they'll probably be in the 420, 430 parts per million range. I think there is almost no dispute on this fact, that human beings produce carbon dioxide, it stays in the atmosphere, the concentration is going up. The debate is over what exactly that means. I think the consensus of the scientific world is that it's connected to the fact the world is both hotter on average over the last 10 or 15 years and that the climate is more extreme in the last 10 or 15 years. Even if you don't agree with that, I'm just presenting this as a state of world opinion. A reality of American politics, a reality of international politics, is that most of the international organizations in the world and lots of dealings among countries will be driven by an understanding that an increase in carbon is a peril is something to be avoided and to be limited. So there's going to be pressure on aviation, on energy supply, on building design, and all the rest. And this will be a part of the world in which this industry operates. So therefore, to bring this up to date, I've said that coal will be with us because there's no alternative. There's going to be very much international and national pressure on coal because of the fear that a rapid increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to be an issue. This leads to my point number 3, that around the world there is a fascinating and encouraging struggle underway to see how these parts of the balance can be squared. And the reason I ended up writing this article for The Atlantic, and I'll tell you how it followed up since then, was precisely because I go to some place in Inner Mongolia, and I'd see a scientist from the University of West Virginia there, or I'd go to a new power plant in Shanghai, and I'd see power officials from the U.S. there, or from Germany, or from Japan, or elsewhere. And I think the main thing to understand about this struggle for the way in which coal can be used, since it has to be used, in a less burdensome way for the world as a whole and for people in the coal fields, is to think about a couple of subsidiary points. One point about this struggle is that even if you're not sort of just externally interested in China, as I have been from being there over the years, this is where the action is for the foreseeable future for your companies, for your universities, for students here, for this reason, that the pace of building new facilities is going to be faster there than any place else on Earth, at least for the next 10 or 15 years. Partly that's because of demand, partly it's because of regulatory flexibility, we might call it. That if you want to design a plant, you know how long it takes to do it here or in my home state of California or any place else. You can get that thing running next year in parts of China. And that may be exaggerating, but you know that the plant in Shanghai recently, which was part of the clean gen type movement, was proposed last of all the international models and opened first, just because of the goods and bads of Chinese flexibility. A couple of illustrations on flexibility. During the 4 recent years, my wife and I were living in both Shanghai and Beijing. Shanghai, during that time, opened 11 entirely new subway lines. Not subway stations, not 11 subway cars, but 11 new subway lines were opened in this time, and Beijing had about 8 of them or so. This is good, but it's also bad. We saw people falling off skyscrapers while they were during construction to their deaths, people doing welding in the middle of night during thunderstorms while standing in puddles of water. They're things you don't see in the rest of the world. But because of the goods and bads of the rapid growth in the utility sector in China, if you want to see new technique for making plants, for having more efficient combustion, and crucially for capturing carbon, this is where the learning by experience will happen. And so I won't belabor the point except to say that so much of this kind of improvement is in the doing. And the place where the doing is happening now is there in ways that can be shared. The knowledge can be shared in the rest of the world. So that leads to the next point about why this is important for people in this world, that it's where the doing is happening, and there is much more opportunity than you would think for American companies, American institutions, American people, American universities. I am not at all in the Pollyannish view about the difficulties of competing with China economically in the long run. There are lots of measures they have which make it difficult for companies from the Western world to expose their intellectual property within China. I was always amused. I could always tell when a U.S. government official was paying a visit to Beijing or Shanghai, because on that day you'd go to the normal pirate video stores and they would have little signs on the front saying, sorry, we're closed until 10:30 a.m. tomorrow when wheels up for Secretary Clinton. You know, the intellectual property is not always well protected. But when it comes to this sort of area, of the actual learning of how to sequester carbon, how to be more efficient, how to inject carbon underground for maximum benefit, the knowledge that is being gained there now is of potential worldwide value. This is something that doesn't hurt the Chinese if you learn from what they are doing. In fact, it helps them because, again, the carbon issue is one of worldwide consequence. And I was astonished when traveling through the hinterland of China to see how deep were the connections. Probably some of you in this room have them too, between your companies, your people, your schools, and their counterparts in these little parts of China. And I'll say if any of you have those, I give you my thanks as an American and as a parent. And if you don't have them, I'm recommending this as a place for you to go. The third aspect, however, of saying that there is this battle is going on now is to recognize some of the limits in America's national position on this front. Let me explain what I mean. All of us are conditioned as Americans to be skeptical of the very idea of economic planning. Now, if you hear the term communist 5-year plan, you think that is a recipe for Soviet-style stagnation. And in the Soviet Union, of course it has, and in China it's led to all sorts of terrible excesses and misallocated investments. In this field, though, the one where you're working, I think we have seen some of the strengths of this kind of longer-term approach and some of the self-limiting problems we're having ourselves. As many of you know from reading the papers, this year the Chinese so-called 12th 5-year plan is being unveiled. And they've picked out a bunch of industries they're going to lay a lot of money on for long-term investment. They want to become an aerospace power. They want to become a cloud computing power. And they want to become the clean energy leader of the world. We know for certain that a lot of the investment they make is going to be wasted. We know it's going to be skimmed off. We know there's going to be people with their billion-dollar accounts that they've taken out. But we also know that over these next 5 years, and probably the 5 after that, they're going to keep funding a lot of these experimental stations. The challenge for the United States is having planning that doesn't go for 5 years or for 2 5-year plans, but for a year or for 2 years. You all know that when the Obama administration came in, there was a new push for clean energy research, for various carbon projects in the Department of Energy. You probably also know that right now, as we speak, as part of the debt ceiling negotiations, a lot of those grants are being zeroed out, or being proposed for zeroed out. So in less than 3 years, the course of U.S. national policy has gone like this. And at our best, we would do a better job than the Chinese would, but we're not at our best that often. And probably there's no industry where long-term investment is more important than it is in the energy field. And so this is the national challenge we have, which leads me to why I find it so admirable that this group with these people is doing what you all are doing. What I mean is this, that if we have found at the national level real problems in planning in any sort of long-term way, and I don't mean state-run enterprise, I just mean investing in things of public importance for periods of more than a year or two. If we found ways that the pressure is on universities and research centers at the national level, et cetera, the burden necessarily shifts to the organizational levels where people actually can cooperate and they can find ways to pool their collective interests and to move beyond the differences they might have on political ideologies or whatever, and to say we have a shared regional interest, a shared state interest in improving our education, improving our research, improving our connections with the rest of the world. And that is, to the best of my understanding, what you all have been doing here, and I can't tell you how much I admire what you're doing. Again, my home state is California originally. California has lots of strengths. If it had the sort of concerted statewide consciousness that you did, it would be an even better situation. And so for Kentucky, which has historic challenges, culturally and economically, and historic opportunities and strengths, which I think will be more and more important ones in this energy-intensive era, what you're doing is very important. Let me sum up this part, and then I have a brief sort of current events supplement to give you, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions. So I've been saying again that we should recognize environmentalists, non-environmentalists, Republicans, Democrats, old people, young people, that coal is an inevitable part of our mix, and that not try to deny that fact away so that's point one. Point two, that we also have to recognize that the damage coal has done in certain ways and the pressure on it in new ways, mainly for carbon emissions, are going to be real factors. The industry needs to take that seriously. The power industry does too, and coal regions do as well. Not view this as some kind of hostility to the coal economy, but a reality which will be coped with. And so that's point two. And point three is to recognize that it's happening. There are people around the world who are willing to work with American partners on finding solutions in efficiency of use, of sequestration, of reuse of carbon dioxide. This is a technological, environmental, cultural challenge of our times, like other great engineering and scientific challenges Americans and the world have had in the past. And it's one to be embraced with real enthusiasm. So I've found, to my interest in the 6 months or so since this article came out, that while the initial response I got was largely hostile from environmentalists saying, what the hell, you went to China and you came back a coal guy, that more and more the response I've gotten is from people saying, yes, here and here and here we find ways to make progress, and let's see if we can keep the United States moving ahead. I'll say one other thing about the response. It turns out, have any of you know the musical group The Eagles? Yes, we all know the Eagles. Don Henley is, of course, one of the singer of the Eagles. Don Henley is a subscriber to The Atlantic. I say no more. He's a rich man, he's a subscriber to The Atlantic, my earlier point. So when he was coming to Beijing in February to give a concert, my wife and I were there. He invited us to the concert, saying, I'm an Atlantic reader. You may not have heard of me. Oh, sure. I like to, I read your article about coal. And after the concert, can I tour some coal facilities with you outside Beijing? So I said, well, let me check my calendar. Probably I can make time. So we went touring some coal facilities outside Beijing. And the idea was the potential excitement of connecting both industry in this country and environmentalists and researchers with the locus of this research, the workbench of the world in China. If Don Henley can do it, so can all the rest of us. Now a 2-minute finale about the situation of America as extrapolated from the situation of Kentucky. I realized recently, I'm a slow learner, that there's been really only one theme I pursued in my entire journalistic career, and that theme is America falling apart? I've spent a lot of my life looking at America from outside the United States. When I lived in England for a while, I've lived in Africa and Japan for several years, and Malaysia and China for a total of about 5 years now, and ended up wondering, as we all do, can we really make it? When I moved back from the latest stint in China, I did a long article in The Atlantic essentially on the theme of, are we going to hell now, finally? We always talk about it, but is it actually happening? And I had an upbeat message there. Part of the upbeat message was, to a surprising degree, Americans have always thought that we were going to hell. The very first speech on American soil about the decline of America from its old days, its old glory, happened in 1628. One of the Massachusetts Bay preachers was saying, back there in 1620, we were really great, but these recent years, kids today, et cetera, our politicians don't work together, and that's been a constant in our culture. It doesn't mean that it's not true, but it is a way that we rouse ourselves. And in recent years, it's been had a foreign comparison, falling behind the Soviets, falling behind the Japanese, now falling behind the Chinese. So that's one source of consolation. A second source of consolation is that if you look at the things which make societies rich, free, and important in the long run, the United States really has no peer. Our university system dominates the entire world and is the university system of the world. Immigration, I view as our secret advantage over everybody, and that this is the arena where talented people from the rest of the world want to express their genius, bring them on. I view it as a sign of strength, not weakness, that in the National Academy of Sciences, half the members are foreign-born. I would view it as a problem if they were all native-born. The fact that people from around the world want to come here is great. We have great rebound capacity and all the rest. The challenge for America, I ended up arguing in this article, is whether our systems of reaching agreement publicly, of deciding on things that are important for the whole nation, whether we can actually do that, whether the tradition of the great compromiser, which those in this state are familiar with, has a place at national level politics in the United States, whether the mechanics of our government and the patterns of intellectual discourse and all the rest were making it so difficult for us to agree on anything that the big issues of the time were hard for us to address. A way I put this was, China's problems are 1,000 times worse than our problems, but it's more likely that China is actually going to address them. Our problems are all theoretically very much within our ability to solve if we were able to do so. So the challenge for America, I think, on the national level is finding ways for our institutions of discussion, of deliberation, of compromise actually to work. That brings me back to my main point here. I know that's what this group exists to do on a state level, and the successes you have had here, and I am sure will have, are important in their own right here, and I hope they will be too as a possible example to the country of the way people from different backgrounds can get together to solve problems that affect all of them. So I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for giving me this chance to explain a part of the world's developments that affect what you do here. And I'll be happy in the few minutes left to accept complaints, corrections, answer questions, or take subscription orders if you really are interested in a successful future. Thank you very much.